The words hit me like ice water to the face. "Mom, you're getting too senile to handle money anymore." Spoken by my own daughter Sarah while she thought I was napping in the next room, her voice carrying that patronizing tone she'd perfected over the past year as she slowly took control of my finances, not knowing I'd been awake for 20 minutes listening to her plan my financial funeral with her husband. You know, there's a particular kind of betrayal that cuts deeper than any romantic heartbreak, and that's when your own child, the one you carried for 9 months, raised for 18 years, and supported through every crisis, decides you're nothing more than a cash cow whose time is up. Sarah Elizabeth Martins, my 42-year-old daughter, had spent the last year convincing me I was losing my mental faculties while bit by bit positioning herself to take over every aspect of my financial life. What she didn't know, as she sat in my kitchen with her husband Dave discussing my supposed dementia like I was already dead, was that I had been pretending to be more confused than I actually was, watching and documenting every manipulative move she made. I suppose I should start at the beginning, though beginnings are tricky things when you've lived 73 years and your story has more chapters than a Russian novel. My name is Jane Elise Harris, though most people call me Maggie, and until 18 months ago, I was living what I thought was a peaceful retirement in the same 4-bedroom colonial house where I'd raised 3 children after my husband Robert died of a heart attack 12 years ago. Robert had been a meticulous financial planner, an accountant by trade and a penny pincher by nature, and he'd left me with a comfortable nest egg of just over $2 million, the house paid off, and enough monthly income from investments and Social Security to live quite nicely without touching the principal. Well, Robert always said I was too trusting for my own good, and he was right about that. The house itself tells the story of our 43 years of marriage, better than any photo album could. Robert built the wraparound porch himself the summer after Sarah was born, spending every weekend measuring and sawing and hammering while I held the baby and brought him lemonade. The kitchen still has the cherry cabinets he installed when we remodeled in 1995, and the master bedroom still contains the antique oak bedroom set we bought at an estate sale when we were newlyweds and so poor we ate macaroni and cheese 3 nights a week. Every room holds memories of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, homework sessions at the dining room table, and late-night conversations about the children's futures and our own dreams. When Robert died, the financial advisors and estate attorneys all assumed I'd want to downsize immediately, move into something smaller and more manageable. But this house wasn't just a building to me. It was the physical embodiment of a life well lived, a marriage that had weathered every storm, and a place where 3 children had grown into adults. The thought of selling it felt like abandoning not just my memories, but my identity as the woman who had created this home alongside the love of her life. My 3 children had all turned out well, or so I thought until this nightmare began. Sarah was the middle child, sandwiched between her older brother Michael Jr., who lived in Seattle with his family and worked as an engineer, and her younger sister Christina, who had become a nurse and lived about an hour away with her husband and twin boys. Michael Jr. called every few weeks and visited twice a year with his wife and their 2 children. Christina stopped by monthly, and always invited me to family gatherings and holiday celebrations. They both seemed content to let me live my life independently, offering help when I asked for it, but never suggesting I couldn't handle my own affairs. Sarah, however, had always been different from her siblings. Even as a child, she'd been the one to question authority, to push boundaries, to find ways to get what she wanted through manipulation rather than direct requests. As a teenager, she'd been expert at playing Robert and me against each other, telling him I'd given permission for something when I hadn't, or convincing me that he'd approved an expense that he knew nothing about. We'd attributed it to typical teenage behavior and assumed she'd outgrow it as she matured and took on adult responsibilities. Marriage to Dave seemed to settle her down for a while. They'd met in college, married young, and struggled financially for the first few years as Dave tried to establish his construction business and Sarah worked part-time jobs while raising their children, Emma and Michael. I'd helped them financially during those lean years. A few thousand here and there for Emma's medical bills when she broke her arm, money for a down payment on their first house, occasional gifts to help with Christmas expenses or unexpected car repairs. I didn't think much of these requests at the time. Robert and I had been fortunate enough to build substantial savings, and helping our children seemed like a natural and loving thing to do. Robert sometimes grumbled about Sarah's tendency to call when she needed money rather than just to chat, but he never refused to help when the need seemed genuine. Looking back now, I can see that Sarah had been testing our boundaries for years, learning exactly how much she could ask for and under what circumstances we'd say yes. The first sign something was wrong should have been when Sarah started visiting more frequently after Robert's death. For the first few years of my widowhood, I saw her maybe once a month, usually when she needed something, money for the kids' activities, help with her mortgage payment when Dave's construction business hit a slow patch, or just someone to watch the grandchildren while she went shopping or met friends for lunch. But suddenly last spring she was stopping by twice a week, always with some excuse about checking on me, making sure I was eating properly, or wanting to help organize my medications. First, I was delighted. After decades of feeling like I came in second to her busy life, here was my daughter finally wanting to spend time with me. She'd bring coffee from that expensive shop downtown, settle into Robert's old recliner, and we'd talk for hours about her children's activities, Dave's latest construction projects, and her plans for redecorating their living room. She seemed genuinely interested in my daily routine, asking detailed questions about my doctor appointments, my book club meetings, and my grocery shopping habits. The conversations felt warm and natural, the kind of mother-daughter bonding I'd always hoped we'd have once she outgrew her rebellious teenage years and the frantic busyness of young motherhood. She'd compliment me on how well I was managing on my own, tell me how proud she was of my independence, and share little stories about Emma and Michael that made me feel like a cherished grandmother rather than an obligation to be managed. But looking back now, I can see how Sarah was using those conversations to gather information about my routines, my weaknesses, and my assets. When she asked about my doctor visits, she wasn't expressing loving concern. She was fishing for any medical information she could use to support claims about my declining health. When she inquired about my daily schedule, she wasn't interested in my well-being. She was mapping out times when she could access my house without my knowledge. The medication thing should have been a red flag the size of Texas, but Sarah presented it so cleverly that I actually felt grateful for her attention. I take 3 prescriptions, blood pressure medication that I've been on for 15 years, a cholesterol tablet that my doctor added after Robert's heart attack, and a vitamin D supplement my doctor recommended after some routine blood work showed I was slightly deficient. Hardly the complex regimen of someone losing their faculties, but Sarah made it sound like I was managing a pharmacy. "Mom, I just worry when I see you with all these bottles," she'd say, her voice full of what seemed like genuine concern. "What if you accidentally took your blood pressure pill twice?" I heard about this woman who ended up in the emergency room because she mixed up her medications. She insisted on setting up one of those weekly pill organizers, the kind with separate compartments for each day, and she wanted to fill it herself every Sunday. The way she presented it made it seem so reasonable, so caring. When I suggested I could easily fill the organizer myself, after all, I'd been managing my own medications for over 70 years, she'd give me that patient smile people use with children who don't understand why adults need to make certain decisions for them. "I know you can, Mom, but this way we can both have peace of mind. You don't have to worry about whether you remembered to take something or not." But then came the incidents, or what I now realize were carefully planned situations designed to make me doubt my own competence. The first was when I couldn't find my car keys for 3 days. I searched everywhere. My purse, the kitchen counter, the little dish by the front door where I usually kept them, even the pockets of coats I hadn't worn in months. Sarah happened to be visiting when I discovered them in the refrigerator, right next to the milk. "Oh, Mom," she said, rushing over to hug me with what seemed like genuine concern. "This is exactly the kind of thing that worries me. How do you think your keys ended up in there?" I stood there staring at those keys, and for a minute I actually wondered, had I really put them there? Was Sarah right to be worried about me? I couldn't come up with any logical explanation, and when Sarah gently suggested that sometimes stress and grief can affect our memory in unexpected ways, it actually made sense to me. The second incident was my checkbook going missing for a week, only to turn up in the linen closet folded inside a set of bed sheets. When I couldn't find that checkbook, I started having those awful thoughts. What if this is how it starts? What if I really am losing my mind like my mother did? Again, Sarah was there when I found it, shaking her head with that worried expression and suggesting maybe it was time to switch to online banking, so these kinds of mix-ups wouldn't be such a problem. The third incident was when I apparently ordered the same book 3 times from Amazon, a mystery novel by an author I'd never heard of. The packages kept arriving over the course of a week, and each time Sarah was there to witness my confusion. I had no memory of placing any Amazon orders, let alone the same book multiple times. But there were the packages with my name and address, and Sarah helpfully showed me the confirmation emails in my inbox. "Mom, this is really concerning," she said during the third book delivery, her voice heavy with the kind of worry that makes you feel both cared for and ashamed. "I think we should mention this to Dr. Lyman at your next appointment. Maybe he should run some tests, just to make sure everything's okay upstairs." Looking back now, I can see how perfectly planned it all was. Sarah had a key to my house, she'd had one for years in case of emergencies, and she knew my routines well enough to know when I napped, when I went to my book club meetings, when I did my grocery shopping at the same time every Thursday morning. It would have been easy for her to move my keys, hide my checkbook, and place online orders using my computer while I was out. She was so clever about it. Each thing by itself seemed like nothing, just me being forgetful. But together they painted a picture of someone whose mental faculties were declining in ways that could become dangerous. A person who puts car keys in the refrigerator might forget to turn off the stove. Someone who misplaces their checkbook might be vulnerable to financial scams. A person who orders things they don't remember ordering might be easily confused by complex financial decisions. Sarah was building a case, one incident at a time, that I was becoming incompetent to manage my own affairs. And because she was my daughter, because she seemed so genuinely concerned about my well-being, because she was always there to help me figure out what had gone wrong, I began to trust her judgment more than my own. Maybe I was having memory problems. Maybe the grief and stress of losing Robert were affecting my mental clarity in ways I hadn't recognized. Maybe I really did need more help than I'd been willing to admit. The financial maneuvering started small and built up gradually, like a river slowly eroding a riverbank until the whole thing collapses at once. First, Sarah suggested I add her name to my checking account, just in case something happens and bills need to be paid. It seemed reasonable. After all, when Robert died, it had taken weeks to get access to accounts that were only in his name, and I didn't want Sarah to face that same bureaucratic nightmare if something happened to me. "It's not that I think anything will happen to you anytime soon, Mom," she assured me as we sat in the bank manager's office. "But you know how complicated these things can get when there's only one name on an account. This way, if you're ever in the hospital or just need someone to help with bill paying, everything will be simple and straightforward." The bank manager, a pleasant woman about Sarah's age, explained the process clearly and seemed to think it was a sensible precaution for someone in my situation. She'd seen too many elderly customers whose families had struggled with financial management during medical emergencies, she said, and joint accounts were one way to avoid those complications. Sarah would have full access to the account, but I would retain complete control and could remove her name at any time if I chose to. What the bank manager didn't explain, and what I didn't think to ask, was that having her name on the account gave Sarah the legal right to access my money without my knowledge or permission. I assumed that joint account meant we'd both need to agree on any major transactions, but in reality, either of us could empty the account completely without the other's consent or even knowledge. Sarah certainly understood this distinction, even if I didn't. The power of attorney came next, presented as another simple precaution that any responsible adult child would suggest to an aging parent. Sarah had done her research. She brought printed articles about the importance of estate planning for elderly people, statistics about the percentage of Americans who die without proper legal documents in place, and stories about families who'd faced expensive legal battles because their elderly relatives hadn't prepared for incapacity. "It's just a precaution, Mom," she assured me as we reviewed the documents her attorney had prepared. "You're sharp as a tack, but you know how the law is. If you ended up in the hospital or had some kind of accident, someone would need to be able to pay your bills and manage things. Without a power of attorney, the courts would have to get involved, and that's expensive and time-consuming for everyone." The attorney Sarah had chosen was a smooth-talking man in his 50s who specialized in elder law, and his office was filled with the kind of heavy furniture and leather-bound books that suggested serious competence. He explained the power of attorney documents in terms that sounded both reassuring and responsible. I would retain complete control over my affairs as long as I was capable, but if I became incapacitated, Sarah would be able to step in and handle necessary financial and medical decisions without bureaucratic delays. What he didn't emphasize, and what I didn't fully understand until much later, was that the document contained extremely broad language about what constituted incapacity, and who would make that determination. The power of attorney wouldn't just activate if I fell into a coma. It could be invoked if Sarah believed I was no longer capable of making sound financial decisions, even if I disagreed with her assessment. The investment account was the next target, and this is where Sarah's planning became truly sophisticated. She had researched a financial advisor, someone who specialized in elder care financial planning, she said, and thought I should meet with him to make sure my investments were structured properly for my age and risk tolerance. Given the incidents with my memory and the general stress of managing finances alone, wouldn't it be wise to get professional guidance about my portfolio? The advisor, Bradley Thompson, had an impressive office in a downtown building and a wall full of credentials and awards. He spent our first meeting reviewing my current investments, mostly conservative mutual funds and bonds that Robert had chosen, and explaining how modern portfolio theory could help me optimize my returns while protecting my principal. He spoke knowledgeably about tax-advantaged strategies for retirees, the importance of inflation protection for people on fixed incomes, and new investment vehicles that hadn't been available when Robert was making our financial decisions. Sarah sat beside me during the meeting, asking all the right questions and taking notes like a concerned daughter helping her aging mother navigate complex financial decisions. She asked about fees, about risk levels, about how often the portfolio would be reviewed and adjusted. She wanted to understand the advisor's philosophy about asset allocation for someone in my situation, and his strategy for balancing growth with capital preservation. What I didn't realize until much later was that the power of attorney document Sarah had prepared gave her much broader authority than she'd let on. While I thought it was a simple contingency plan that would only be activated if I became genuinely incapacitated, the actual document made her a co-decision maker with authority to make financial transactions even while I was perfectly competent. And Mr. Thompson's firm, I discovered, charged hefty management fees and had been slowly moving my conservative investments into riskier products that generated higher commissions for him. The beauty of Sarah's approach was that each change seemed reasonable and was presented as being in my best interest. Adding her name to my checking account was a simple precaution. The power of attorney was responsible estate planning. Working with a professional financial advisor was prudent money management for someone my age. Each step seemed logical and caring, but together they gave Sarah increasing control over my financial life. The house became the next battlefield, though it was presented as concern for my safety and well-being rather than the financial grab it actually was. Sarah started pointing out maintenance issues I needed to address. The front steps were looking a little uneven and might be a trip hazard. The kitchen faucet had developed a persistent drip that was probably wasting water and money. The heating system was getting old and unreliable, and might fail during the next cold snap. Each observation was accompanied by suggestions about contractors who could fix the problems, and estimates that always seemed to come in higher than expected. The front steps would need to be completely rebuilt rather than simply repaired, at a cost of $3,000. The kitchen faucet was just the visible symptom of aging plumbing throughout the house, and a complete update would run about $12,000. The heating system was not just old but inefficient, and replacing it with a modern unit would cost $8,000, but would save money on energy bills over time. "Mom, this house is getting to be too much for you," she'd say after presenting me with yet another estimate for necessary repairs. "Maybe it's time to think about something smaller, more manageable. You shouldn't have to worry about furnaces and plumbing, and all these maintenance headaches at this stage of your life." The conversations about assisted living started around month 6 of her campaign, and they were masterfully presented as opportunities rather than necessities. Sarah would bring glossy brochures from upscale senior communities, spreading them across my kitchen table like a travel agent showing vacation destinations to prospective clients. "Look at this place, Mom. They have a dining room where you don't have to cook, activities coordinators to keep you engaged socially, and medical staff available 24 hours a day. Wouldn't it be nice not to worry about maintaining this big house anymore?" The facilities she showed me were beautiful, I'll give her that. Sunset Manor looked like a luxury resort, with elegant common areas, beautifully landscaped grounds, and apartments that looked more like hotel suites than institutional housing. The marketing materials emphasized independence and dignity, showcasing residents who were engaged in art classes, book clubs, and social events. The message was clear. This wasn't about giving up your autonomy, it was about enhancing your quality of life. But the facilities were also expensive, the kind of places that would eat through even substantial savings in 5 or 6 years. The basic monthly fee at Sunset Manor was $6,000, not including meals, housekeeping, or any additional services. If I needed any level of medical assistance, the costs would increase dramatically. Sarah had calculated that I could afford it for maybe 7 years using my current assets, and after that I'd need to look into Medicaid options. What struck me as odd was how thoroughly Sarah had researched these facilities and how detailed her financial projections were. She seemed to know exactly how much money I had, how long it would last in different scenarios, and what would happen when it ran out. For someone who was supposedly concerned about my declining mental capacity, she certainly trusted my ability to accumulate and preserve wealth over the decades. I began to understand the scope of her plan when I overheard a phone conversation she was having in my living room while I was supposedly napping upstairs. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September. This was back in September, I remember, because the leaves were just starting to turn, and Sarah had come by to help me organize my winter clothes, or so she said. But instead of helping me sort through sweaters and coats, she'd made herself comfortable in Robert's old recliner and was having what sounded like a business conversation. The financial advisor thinks we can get her moved into Sunset Manor by Christmas, she was saying to someone on the phone, her voice carrying the tone of someone discussing a corporate restructuring rather than a family decision. Once she's there and we have full financial control, we can sell the house and use the proceeds to pay for her care. Bradley estimated we'll need about $80,000 a year for the facility, which means her savings should last maybe 6 or 7 years. After that, we'll have to look into Medicaid options. I was lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what I was hearing. It hit me like a truck. My own daughter looked at me and saw dollar signs, not her mother. She was talking about my life as if it were a business problem to be solved, calculating how long my money would last and what would happen when it ran out. But it was the next part of the conversation that really opened my eyes to who my daughter had become. The best part is, once she's in assisted living and we have power of attorney, we can use some of the money to pay off our mortgage and maybe finally take that European vacation we've been talking about. I mean, it's not like she'll need it all sitting in investments anymore. And if she's in a nice facility, she'll probably be happier anyway. No more worrying about house maintenance or cooking or any of that stuff. I couldn't believe how much planning she'd put into lying to me. The casual way she discussed spending my life savings, money Robert and I had saved for 43 years of marriage, money we'd sacrifice vacations and luxuries to accumulate, money we'd invested carefully so I could have security in my old age, made my blood run cold. But what really devastated me was hearing my daughter discuss my future as if my preferences and desires were irrelevant, as if the only thing that mattered was finding the most efficient way to liquidate my assets. Dave's a little worried about the timing, Sarah continued, apparently responding to something the other person had said. He thinks we should wait until after the holidays, maybe give her more time to adjust to the idea. But honestly, I think the sooner we get this done, the better. She's having more and more incidents with her memory, and I'm worried she's going to do something really dangerous like leave the stove on or forget to lock the doors. The longer we wait, the more likely she is to resist the move or get confused about what's happening. The incidents she was referring to were the planted evidence I now understood she'd been creating. My keys in the refrigerator, my checkbook in the linen closet, the mysterious Amazon orders. She was using her own manipulations as justification for taking control of my life, and apparently discussing the timeline with someone who was helping her plan my financial dismantling. That night, lying in the bed I'd shared with Robert for over 4 decades, I faced the devastating reality that my own daughter saw me as nothing more than a financial resource to be managed and eventually depleted. The woman who used to call me her best friend, who had cried in my arms through her divorce from her first husband and her struggles with fertility and her fears about Dave's drinking, had calculated that my independence and dignity were worth less than her mortgage balance and a trip to Europe. But here's what Sarah had underestimated in her elaborate scheme. She had underestimated both my mental acuity and my capacity for strategic thinking. The hardest part wasn't gathering the evidence or dealing with the lawyers later. It was knowing that what I was doing would probably destroy any chance of ever having a relationship with Sarah again. She was still my daughter, you know? Even after everything. While she'd been busy creating incidents to make me appear confused, I'd been quietly conducting my own investigation into her activities. I installed a small security camera in my living room, disguised as a decorative clock, after the second mysterious incident with my missing items. I started keeping detailed notes about her visits, documenting every conversation and every piece of advice she offered. And I began doing my own research into the financial advisor she'd recommended, the assisted living facilities she kept promoting, and the legal implications of the power of attorney document she'd pressured me to sign. The security camera was easier to set up than I'd expected. Modern technology has made surveillance equipment much more user-friendly than it was in Robert's day. I ordered it online using my own computer, had it delivered while Sarah was at work, and spent an afternoon reading the instructions and testing different positions until I found one that would capture the entire living room without being obvious. The camera looked exactly like an ordinary mantel clock, and it could record hours of footage on a small memory card that I could review on my laptop. Installing the camera felt like the first step in reclaiming control over my own life. For months, I'd been allowing Sarah to make me doubt my own perceptions and capabilities, accepting her explanations for mysterious incidents that didn't make sense. But now I would have objective evidence of what was really happening in my house when I wasn't looking. If I was truly having memory problems and doing things I couldn't remember, the camera would show that. If someone else was moving my belongings and staging incidents, the camera would capture that too. What I discovered made me sick to my stomach. Over the course of 3 weeks, I captured footage of Sarah entering my house with her key during times when she knew I was out, going through my mail, moving items around my house, and on one particularly damning afternoon, using my computer to place an Amazon order for books I would never have chosen, then deleting the confirmation email from my inbox. I couldn't believe how much planning she put into lying to me. She wasn't just taking advantage of an opportunity, she was actively creating the conditions that would justify her takeover of my life. The most disturbing footage showed Sarah carefully moving my car keys from their usual spot by the front door to the refrigerator, positioning them next to the milk where they'd be easily visible but completely inexplicable. She even checked to make sure they were positioned at the right angle to be found quickly when she helped me search for them the next day. Watching her stage the very incident she would later use as evidence of my declining mental capacity was like watching someone poison a well and then express concern about the water quality. But the camera also captured something else that proved invaluable. Conversations Sarah had in my living room when she thought I was napping upstairs. Modern surveillance equipment picks up audio with remarkable clarity, and I was able to record not just her phone conversation about my financial future, but several others that revealed the full scope of her planning. In one conversation, she discussed the power of attorney documents with someone who sounded like an attorney, asking detailed questions about what authority the documents would give her, and how soon she could begin making financial decisions on my behalf. In another, she talked with Dave about which contractors they should use to renovate their own kitchen once they paid off their mortgage with my money. The third was a conversation with someone at Sunset Manor about room availability and payment schedules. The recordings revealed that Sarah had been planning this takeover for months, researching every aspect of the process and coordinating with professionals who were helping her prepare the legal and financial groundwork. She hadn't stumbled into the idea of taking control of my assets. She had step-by-step planned to create evidence of my incompetence and use that evidence to justify seizing control of my financial life. I spent several sleepless nights deciding how to handle the situation. Part of me wanted to confront Sarah directly, to show her the evidence I'd gathered and demand an explanation. But I knew that approach would likely result in her simply becoming more careful, more subtle in her manipulations. Instead, I decided to beat her at her own game by appearing to go along with her plans while secretly preparing my counterattack. The first step was securing legal representation. I contacted the law firm that had handled Robert's estate planning, a prestigious downtown practice where I'd always felt respected and valued as a client. Donna Hartwell, the attorney who'd handled Robert's will, was a woman about my age who had built her practice representing clients through major life transitions. When I called her office and explained that I needed to discuss some concerns about financial planning and family dynamics, she scheduled an appointment for the following week. Donna's office reflected her success and competence, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal volumes, diplomas and awards covering one wall, and a massive mahogany desk that had probably witnessed decades of important legal decisions. But what impressed me most was how she listened to my story without the patronizing attitude I'd come to expect from younger professionals. She took notes, asked clarifying questions, and treated my concerns as legitimate, rather than the complaints of a confused elderly woman. When I explained the situation to Donna, her reaction was immediate and fierce. "Mrs. Harris," she said, leaning forward across her desk with an expression of barely controlled anger, "what you're describing is elder financial abuse, and it's both a civil and criminal matter. We need to document everything and take immediate steps to protect your assets." Donna explained that financial abuse of elderly persons was a growing problem, and that family members were often the perpetrators. Adult children who saw their aging parents as sources of money, rather than people deserving of respect, were using increasingly sophisticated methods to gain control of their parents' assets. She reviewed the power of attorney document I'd signed and confirmed my worst fears. It gave Sarah broad authority over my finances, and the language was vague enough that she could justify almost any transaction as being in my best interest. However, Donna also pointed out that since I was clearly competent and had evidence of Sarah's deceptive practices, we could take steps to revoke the power of attorney and protect my assets. "The beautiful thing about your daughter's scheme," Donna said with grim satisfaction, "is that she's been so thorough in documenting her own criminal behavior. Those security camera recordings you've gathered are absolutely damning evidence of fraud and manipulation. And if she's been working with professionals who knew or should have known that she was creating false evidence of your incompetence, they could face professional sanctions and criminal charges as well." The process of building my case took 6 weeks and required more strategic thinking than I'd used since my days as a high school mathematics teacher. With Donna's guidance, I opened new bank accounts at a different institution, gradually transferring my funds in amounts small enough not to trigger immediate attention from Sarah or the financial advisor. I documented every interaction I had with Bradley Thompson's firm, recording phone calls where he made recommendations clearly designed to benefit his commission, rather than my financial security. Meanwhile, I had to continue playing the role Sarah expected: a confused, declining elderly woman who was grateful for her daughter's increased attention and helpful suggestions. It was perhaps the most difficult acting job of my life. I had to bite my tongue when she made condescending comments about my supposed memory problems. I had to nod agreeably when she brought more assisted living brochures. I had to resist the urge to confront her when she found my supposedly misplaced items in ridiculous locations where I would never have left them. The hardest part was watching her interactions with my grandchildren during this period. Emma, 16, and Michael, 14, were the lights of my life, and I'd always prided myself on being the kind of grandmother who was involved in their activities and interests. I attended their school plays and soccer games, helped with homework when they struggled with math or science, and listened to their teenage dramas with the kind of patience their parents sometimes lacked. But Sarah had begun limiting their visits to my house, telling them I was having some health issues, and that it might be better if they waited until I was feeling more like myself. She encouraged them to call instead of visiting, and when they did come by, she stayed throughout their visit to help Grandma if she gets confused about anything. The cruel irony was that I was feeling exactly like myself. It was Sarah who had become someone I no longer recognized. The daughter who used to seek my advice about parenting decisions was now treating me like a child who couldn't be trusted alone with her own grandchildren. The woman who used to praise my wisdom and life experience was now acting as if I needed supervision to carry on a conversation. Emma, who had always been perceptive beyond her years, seemed to sense that something wasn't quite right about the situation. During one of their supervised visits, she asked me directly if I was feeling okay, if there was anything wrong that I needed help with. I wanted desperately to tell her the truth, to explain that her mother was trying to take control of my life and money, but I knew that would only accelerate Sarah's timeline and potentially put Emma in an impossible position. Instead, I assured her that I was fine, just dealing with some adult decisions that sometimes seem complicated. "Your mom is helping me figure out the best way to handle things," I told her, hating myself for the lie but knowing it was necessary to protect my larger plan. Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult choices about money and living situations, and it helps to have family support. Emma nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She'd spent enough time with me over the years to know that I wasn't the kind of person who needed help making decisions or managing my own affairs. But she also trusted her mother, and couldn't imagine that Sarah might be lying about my condition or my needs. The breakthrough came when Sarah made her biggest mistake. She got greedy and impatient. Instead of continuing to move slowly and maintain the pretense of caring concern, she decided to accelerate her timeline. I was sitting in my favorite chair, supposedly dozing after lunch, when she arrived with Dave and a folder full of papers. They thought I was asleep, and their conversation revealed the final phase of her plan. The people at Sunset Manor said they could have a room ready by next week if we can get the paperwork completed, Sarah told Dave, spreading documents across my coffee table like a real estate agent preparing a closing. I've already filled out most of the application, and Bradley thinks we can liquidate enough of her investments to cover the first year's fees without any problem. Dave, who I'd always thought was a decent man despite his occasional drinking problems and financial struggles, seemed uncomfortable with the pace of events. Don't you think we should talk to her about this first? I mean, she hasn't actually agreed to move into assisted living yet. Shouldn't she be part of the decision? Sarah's laugh was cold and calculating, nothing like the warm sound I remembered from her childhood. Dave, she's been agreeing to everything I suggest for months now. Besides, I've got documentation from her doctor about concerns with cognitive decline. That's all we need to justify the move. Once she's in the facility and adjusting to the routine, she'll probably be happier anyway. And we'll finally be able to get our finances back on track. The doctor's note she mentioned was news to me. I'd had my annual physical 3 months earlier, and Dr. Lyman had pronounced me in excellent health for my age, with no concerns about my mental acuity whatsoever. He'd actually complimented me on how well I was managing my health independently, noting that many patients my age required much more medical intervention and monitoring. The idea that Sarah had somehow obtained or fabricated a medical opinion to support her scheme was the final straw in my growing anger, but I forced myself to remain still and continue listening. Look at these forms, Sarah continued, and I could hear papers rustling as she spread them across my coffee table. I've already filled out everything except her signature. The admission fee is $15,000. Plus the first month's rent of $6,000, so we'll need to liquidate about $25,000 from her investments right away. Bradley says he can have the money transferred within 48 hours, once we get her signature on the withdrawal authorization. Dave's voice carried a note of uncertainty that gave me hope he might still possess some conscience. Sarah, this feels rushed. Maybe we should slow down, give her more time to get used to the idea. I mean, she's lived in this house for 40 years? This is a huge change. 43 years, Sarah corrected him, as if the exact number mattered for her calculations. And that's exactly why we need to move quickly. The longer she stays here, the more attached she'll become to staying, and the harder it'll be to convince her that assisted living is the right choice. Besides, winter's coming, and I don't want her dealing with heating bills and snow removal, and all that stuff when she's already struggling with basic daily tasks. The casual way she lied about my capabilities was breathtaking. I managed my daily tasks just fine, better than fine actually. I still cooked elaborate meals for myself, maintained a garden that was the envy of my neighbors, balanced my checkbook to the penny every month, and read voraciously. The only things I struggled with were the mysterious incidents Sarah herself had been creating. Plus, Sarah continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone revealing a particularly clever strategy, once we sell this house, we can pay off our mortgage completely and still have enough left over for that European trip we've been planning. The real estate agent thinks we can get at least $350,000 for this place, maybe more if we do some cosmetic updates first. After paying off Mom's assisted living fees for the first year, we'd still have about $200,000 to work with. My house, the home Robert and I had built together, where we'd raised our children and celebrated 43 years of marriage, had become nothing more than a real estate transaction in Sarah's mind. She was discussing selling my life's work to fund her vacation as casually as someone might talk about trading in an old car for a newer model. I don't know, Sarah, Dave said, and I could hear the doubt growing in his voice. This whole thing makes me uncomfortable. Your mom's not that bad off. I mean, when I talk to her, she seems pretty sharp. Are we sure we're not rushing into something here? Dave, you don't see her every day like I do, Sarah replied with exasperated patience. You don't see the little incidents, the confusion, the way she gets overwhelmed by simple decisions. Just last week, She couldn't remember having lunch with me even though we'd talked about it the day before. And the medication mix-ups are getting worse. I found her blood pressure pills in the kitchen cabinet instead of the bathroom medicine chest. Every example she gave was either a complete fabrication or the result of her own manipulations. The lunch she mentioned had never happened. I kept a detailed calendar and would have remembered any plans we'd made. The medication incident was particularly galling because Sarah was the only person besides me who had access to my pill bottles, since she insisted on organizing them every week. "Look," Sarah said, her voice becoming firmer and more decisive. "I've done all the research, talked to all the professionals and gotten everything set up. All we need is her signature on these forms, and we can get this process started. I'll present it to her as an exciting new chapter in her life, emphasize all the social activities and the relief from household responsibilities. She trusts me, and she knows I have her best interests at heart." The phrase best interests made my stomach turn. Sarah had convinced herself that stealing my independence and liquidating my assets was somehow a loving act, that forcing me into institutional care I didn't want or need was a kindness rather than a betrayal. She'd rationalized her greed as concern and her manipulation as family responsibility. That evening, after Sarah and Dave left with promises to talk more about the exciting transition the next day, I called Donna Hartwell at home. I had her personal number for emergencies, and this certainly qualified as one. "It's time," I told her, my voice steady despite the rage and heartbreak coursing through me. "They're planning to move me into assisted living next week, with or without my genuine consent. I want to revoke the power of attorney immediately and expose everything they've been doing." Donna had been preparing for this moment for weeks. She'd already drafted the legal documents necessary to revoke Sarah's power of attorney, and had prepared a comprehensive report documenting her financial abuse, complete with security camera footage, recorded phone calls, and evidence of the fraudulent incidents she'd staged. "Mrs. Harris," Donna said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd spent her career protecting clients from predators, "tomorrow we're going to turn the tables completely. Are you ready for this?" I thought about Robert, about the life we'd built together and the security he'd worked so hard to provide for my retirement years. I thought about Emma and Michael, who were being taught to see me as a burden rather than a resource of wisdom and love. I thought about all the other elderly people who might be facing similar manipulation from family members who saw them as cash cows rather than human beings deserving of respect and dignity. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," I told her. The next morning, Sarah arrived at my house with Dave and a cheerful attitude that made my skin crawl. She'd brought coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery, along with a briefcase full of papers for me to sign. She was dressed in her best business casual outfit, as if she were closing a real estate deal rather than manipulating her own mother into institutional care. "Mom, I have such exciting news," she began, settling into the chair across from me with the satisfied air of someone who believes their plan is going perfectly. "The people at Sunset Manor called yesterday, and they have a beautiful room available immediately. It has a lovely view of their garden, and the staff there is so excited to meet you." I let her go through her entire presentation, playing the role of the confused but compliant elderly woman she expected to see. She described the benefits of professional care, the relief I'd feel at not having to maintain my house anymore, the wonderful social opportunities I'd have with people my own age. She spread the admission papers across my kitchen table like she was presenting a vacation package, rather than signing away my independence. "The timing is perfect," Sarah continued, her voice bright with false enthusiasm. "They can have you moved in by Friday, which gives us the weekend to help you get settled. Isn't that wonderful? No more worrying about grocery shopping or cooking or any of those tedious daily chores." She made it sound like I'd won some kind of prize rather than being forced into a situation I'd never agreed to. The condescending tone she used, speaking to me like I was a child who needed help understanding simple concepts, was perhaps more infuriating than her financial manipulations. "All you need to do is sign these forms," she said, pulling out a pen with a flourish, "and we can have you moved in by Friday. Isn't that wonderful?" "Well, it certainly sounds wonderful, Sarah," I said, maintaining the mild, slightly confused tone she'd grown to expect from me. "But before I sign anything, there are a few people I'd like you to meet." The doorbell rang on cue. Donna Hartwell had timed her arrival perfectly. Sarah looked puzzled as I went to answer the door, returning with Donna and 2 other people. Detective Jim Kellerman from the County Sheriff's Department, who specialized in elder abuse cases, and Timothy Brooks, a certified public accountant Donna had brought in to review my financial records and document the inappropriate transactions Sarah had orchestrated. "Sarah, Dave," I said, my voice now clear and strong in a way they hadn't heard for months, "I'd like you to meet my attorney, Donna Hartwell, Detective Kellerman, and my accountant, Mr. Brooks. They're here because we've discovered some serious irregularities in how my finances have been handled recently." The transformation in Sarah's face was immediate and dramatic. The confident, patronizing expression she'd worn for months dissolved into confusion, then growing alarm as she began to understand that her carefully constructed plan was unraveling before her eyes. "Mom, what's going on? Why do you have all these people here? Are you feeling confused again?" Even now, caught red-handed, she was still trying to gaslight me, still attempting to convince everyone present that I was too mentally incompetent to understand what was happening. But Donna stepped forward with the authority of someone who'd spent 30 years protecting clients from financial predators. "Ms. Martins," Donna said, her voice carrying the kind of professional gravitas that made people pay attention, "I'm here representing your mother in a case of suspected elder financial abuse. We have substantial evidence that you have been systematically manipulating Mrs. Harris's perceived mental capacity in order to gain unauthorized control of her finances and property." Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "That's ridiculous," she finally managed to say. "I've been helping my mother because she's having memory problems. Everything I've done has been to protect her and make sure she's safe." Detective Kellerman consulted his notebook with the methodical approach of someone who'd investigated dozens of similar cases. "Ms. Martins, we have security camera footage showing you entering this house without your mother's knowledge and staging incidents designed to make her appear incompetent. We also have recorded conversations where you discuss your plans to liquidate her assets for your own benefit." The security camera footage was devastating to watch, even though I'd seen it multiple times during the preparation for this confrontation. Sarah's face went from pale to ashen as we showed her video of herself entering my house with her key, moving my possessions to unlikely locations, and using my computer to place orders I would never have made. The timestamps on the footage proved that these incidents occurred during times when I was away from the house, demonstrating that Sarah had been deliberately creating evidence of my supposed confusion. But perhaps even more damning were the recorded phone conversations with Dave about their timeline for moving me into assisted living and accessing my money. Sarah's own voice, captured clearly by my surveillance equipment, revealed the calculated nature of her scheme and her complete disregard for my preferences or well-being. "Mrs. Martins," Detective Kellerman continued, "we also have evidence that you may have falsified medical opinions to support your claims about your mother's mental capacity. Dr. Lyman has confirmed that he never expressed concerns about Mrs. Harris's cognitive abilities, and he's very interested in how his name came to be associated with documentation suggesting otherwise." Dave, to his credit, looked genuinely shocked by the extent of Sarah's deception. "I didn't know about the security cameras," he said quietly, staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. I mean, Sarah said you were really having problems with your memory, and that the doctor was concerned." "What Dave is learning," I said, looking directly at my daughter with a mixture of disappointment and satisfaction, "is that I haven't had any memory problems at all. I've been documenting everything you've done for months, Sarah. Every lie, every manipulation, every time you moved my things to make me think I was losing my mind. I have it all recorded, and I've been working with professionals to build a case against you." Sarah's attempts to maintain her innocence crumbled quickly under the weight of the evidence. She tried claiming she was only trying to help, that she was genuinely concerned about my safety and well-being. But when Donna presented the evidence of her conversations about using my money to pay off her mortgage and fund their European vacation, even Sarah couldn't maintain the pretense that her motives were purely altruistic. "Look, I was trying to help her," Sarah said, her voice becoming desperate. "She was putting her keys in weird places. I thought she might hurt herself. Maybe I got a little carried away, but I was just worried about her safety. The legal situation is quite serious," Donna explained to the room, though her words were primarily directed at Sarah. "Financial abuse of an elderly person is a felony in this state, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Additionally, Mrs. Harris has grounds for a substantial civil lawsuit to recover any funds that were improperly accessed or lost due to unsuitable investment advice that was procured through fraudulent representation of her mental capacity. Timothy Brooks, the accountant, had spent the previous week reviewing all of my financial records and documenting the inappropriate transactions that had occurred since Sarah gained access to my accounts. Based on my analysis, he said, consulting a thick folder of documents, Ms. Martins has accessed approximately $47,000 from her mother's accounts over the past 8 months, supposedly for household expenses and medical costs. However, bank records show that much of this money was used for personal expenses unrelated to Mrs. Harris's care. The number shocked me. I hadn't realized Sarah had been systematically draining my accounts to that extent. $47,000 represented a significant portion of my annual income, money that had been taken without my knowledge or consent, while Sarah maintained the fiction that she was only helping me manage my finances. Additionally, Brooks continued, the investment advisor Ms. Martins recommended has moved Mrs. Harris's portfolio into high-risk, high-commission products that are entirely inappropriate for someone in her financial situation. These changes have resulted in substantial fees and losses that could have been avoided with proper fiduciary oversight. The immediate consequences for Sarah were swift and comprehensive. Detective Kellerman placed her under arrest on charges of elder financial abuse, fraud, and forgery related to the falsified medical documentation. The power of attorney was revoked immediately, and all accounts she'd had access to were frozen pending a complete investigation of her financial activities. Bradley Thompson's firm was notified that they were under investigation for their role in the scheme, and his professional license was suspended while the State Securities Commission conducted their review. The assisted living facility that had been paying referral fees to advisors who recommended elderly clients was also facing regulatory scrutiny for their potentially exploitative practices. But the most satisfying consequence was watching Sarah's realization that her elaborate plan had not only failed but had backfired spectacularly. Instead of gaining control of my assets, she'd lost all access to them, and now faced serious criminal charges that could result in substantial prison time. The mortgage she'd planned to pay off with my money was still her responsibility, and the European vacation she dreamed of was replaced with legal fees and court appearances. Dave, who had seemed uncomfortable with Sarah's scheme from the beginning, announced that afternoon that he was filing for divorce. I can't be married to someone who would do this to her own mother, he told me privately while Sarah was being processed at the police station. I thought I knew who she was, but this changes everything. The aftermath required months of legal proceedings and financial reorganization, but I approached it with energy and clarity I hadn't felt in years. Donna helped me restructure my investments with a legitimate financial advisor who specialized in ethical retirement planning and had a fiduciary duty to act in my best interests rather than maximize commissions. I updated my will to ensure that my assets would be protected from future manipulation attempts, establishing a trust structure that would provide for my care, while preventing any individual from gaining too much control over my finances. I also added specific language excluding Sarah from any inheritance or decision-making authority, ensuring that her betrayal would have permanent consequences. The most important step was rebuilding relationships with my grandchildren, who had been told lies about my mental state for months. Emma and Michael were old enough to understand that their mother had made serious mistakes, but young enough to be grateful that their grandmother was still the sharp, caring person they'd always known. I knew something wasn't right, Emma told me during one of our first unsupervised visits after Sarah's arrest. You didn't seem confused or forgetful when we talked, but Mom kept saying you were having problems. I didn't know what to believe. Michael, who had always been more direct in his approach to family drama, asked me point-blank whether I thought his mother was a bad person. It was a difficult question to answer honestly without completely destroying his relationship with Sarah, but I tried to explain that people sometimes make terrible choices without being fundamentally evil. Your mother lost her way, I told him. She started thinking about money and her own problems instead of thinking about family and doing what's right. That doesn't make her a monster, but it does mean she has to face the consequences of her choices. We established new traditions, weekly dinners at my house where Emma and Michael could help me cook, and we could talk openly about family relationships, personal integrity, and the importance of treating elderly people with respect and dignity. These conversations became some of the most meaningful interactions I'd had with my grandchildren, deeper and more honest than our previous relationship had allowed. The house that Sarah had been so eager to sell and liquidate remained my home, but I made modifications to ensure it would serve me well for years to come. I installed an updated security system, not because I expected to be victimized again, but because the experience had taught me the importance of protecting myself and documenting anything suspicious. I modified the master bathroom for aging in place, adding grab bars and a walk-in shower that would allow me to maintain my independence, even if my mobility became limited. I hired a weekly housekeeper to help with heavy cleaning and a lawn service to handle the more strenuous yard work, using money I saved by not being forced into assisted living to make investments in my continued independence. Perhaps most importantly, I used my experience to help other elderly people who might be facing similar manipulation from family members. I began volunteering with the county's Elder Services program, sharing my story at community centers and senior groups to help others recognize the warning signs of financial abuse. The presentations I gave were eye-opening for both the audiences and myself. I discovered that my experience, while devastating, was far from unique. Elder financial abuse by family members was an epidemic that most people preferred not to discuss, partly because it was so painful to acknowledge that children might exploit their own parents. The security camera system I'd installed to catch Sarah became a model for other elderly people who suspected they were being taken advantage of by relatives or caregivers. Several seniors in my support group installed similar systems and discovered that their suspicions about theft or manipulation were completely justified. Donna Hartwell introduced me to a support group for elderly people who'd experienced financial abuse by family members, and I was shocked to discover how common the problem was. The stories I heard were heartbreakingly similar to my own. Adult children who saw their aging parents as sources of money rather than people deserving of respect, relatives who convinced elderly family members they were incompetent in order to gain control of their assets, and family members who justified their theft by claiming they were looking out for their elderly relatives. One woman in the group, Eleanor, had been systematically robbed by her son, who convinced her she had dementia and needed him to manage her checkbook. Another, Robert, discovered that his daughter had been forging his signature on checks for 2 years, stealing nearly $30,000 before he caught her. Each story reinforced my understanding that Sarah's behavior wasn't an aberration. It was part of a larger pattern of exploitation that preyed on society's assumptions about aging and mental capacity. The group became an important part of my healing process and my new sense of purpose. We worked together to develop educational materials for other elderly people, sharing strategies for protecting assets and recognizing manipulation. We also advocated for stronger legal protections for elderly people and better training for financial institutions to help them identify potential abuse. Working with law enforcement to prosecute these cases taught me how important it was for victims to speak up and seek help. Detective Kellerman explained that many elder abuse cases went unreported because victims were embarrassed or felt guilty about turning in family members. But he emphasized that holding abusers accountable was the only way to protect other potential victims and send a message that these crimes would be taken seriously. Sarah's legal case dragged on for nearly a year, during which time she attempted various defense strategies ranging from claiming she was trying to help me to suggesting that I was competent enough to manipulate the situation but somehow not competent enough to make my own financial decisions. None of these arguments held up under scrutiny, particularly given the extensive evidence of her deliberate deception. The criminal conviction was everything I'd hoped for in terms of justice. Sarah pled guilty to elder financial abuse and fraud in exchange for a sentence of 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service working with elderly people, and mandatory counseling sessions about respecting family relationships and recognizing the autonomy of aging relatives. She was also ordered to pay full restitution for all the financial losses I'd incurred due to her scheme, including the excessive fees charged by Bradley Thompson's firm and the money she'd stolen directly from my accounts. The total amount was just over $75,000, a substantial sum that represented not just the money she'd taken but the cost of repairing the damage she'd caused to my financial security. The criminal conviction meant that Sarah could never again serve as power of attorney for an elderly person, and her name was added to a state registry of people who'd committed financial crimes against elderly victims. While part of me was sad to see my daughter face such serious consequences, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that other elderly people would be protected from her manipulative tactics. The civil lawsuit was settled for an additional $50,000, representing compensation for the emotional distress and violation of trust she'd caused. Donna also helped me file complaints against Thompson's firm with professional licensing boards, resulting in fines and sanctions that sent a message to other financial advisors who might be tempted to take advantage of elderly clients. The most profound change in my life wasn't financial or legal. It was psychological and emotional. For months, I'd been made to doubt my own competence and judgment by someone I trusted completely. The gaslighting had been so systematic and convincing that I'd begun to question whether I really was losing my mental faculties, whether the incidents I couldn't explain were signs of serious cognitive decline. Proving not only that I was competent, but that I was strategic and capable enough to expose a complex fraud scheme gave me a confidence I hadn't felt since Robert's death. I discovered strengths I hadn't known I possessed: the ability to conduct a covert investigation, to work with law enforcement and legal professionals, to present evidence in court and testify about my experiences. Each challenge I met successfully reinforced my sense of capability and independence. The investigation and legal proceedings required me to learn about financial crimes, evidence gathering, and legal procedures. I had to navigate complex bureaucracies, coordinate with multiple professionals, and maintain my composure during difficult confrontations. Every step proved to myself and others that I was far from the confused, declining elderly woman Sarah had tried to portray. The relationship with my grandchildren deepened as they came to understand what had really happened and why their mother was facing legal consequences. Emma, now 17, wrote her senior English paper about elder abuse and the importance of intergenerational respect, interviewing me and several other members of my support group for her research. I learned that getting older doesn't make someone less smart or less deserving of respect, she wrote in her conclusion. My grandmother taught me that wisdom comes from experience, and that families should protect each other, not take advantage of each other. Michael, now 15, began spending weekends at my house, helping with yard work and learning to cook some of his grandfather's favorite recipes. He expressed anger at his mother for lying to him about my condition and for trying to manipulate me financially, but he also showed remarkable maturity in understanding that people can make terrible choices without being irredeemably evil. "I'm proud of you for fighting back, Grandma," he told me one Saturday afternoon as we planted bulbs for next spring's garden. "Mom always taught us to stand up for ourselves, but I guess she forgot that applies to everyone, not just young people." Both children maintained limited contact with Sarah after her conviction, seeing her occasionally but with the understanding that their primary loyalty was to truth and justice rather than unconditional family support. They'd learned important lessons about personal integrity and the courage required to do the right thing, even when it's difficult. The financial recovery exceeded my expectations. Not only were all the fees and losses from Bradley Thompson's firm recovered, but the civil lawsuit resulted in additional compensation that left me in a stronger financial position than I'd been in before Sarah's scheme began. Donna also helped me establish relationships with ethical financial and legal professionals who treated me with respect and kept me fully informed about all decisions affecting my assets. The new financial advisor I worked with, Patricia Williams, specialized in serving elderly clients and had a fiduciary duty to act in my best interests. She took time to understand my goals, my risk tolerance, and my long-term plans, creating an investment strategy that balanced growth with security and provided me with steady income while preserving capital for my later years. "Mrs. Harris," Patricia told me during one of our quarterly reviews, "you're in an excellent position financially. Your assets are well diversified, your income exceeds your expenses, and you have enough reserves to handle any unexpected costs that might arise. You can live comfortably in your own home for as long as you choose, and you'll still have substantial assets to leave to your grandchildren." 2 years after that awful afternoon when I first heard Sarah discussing my supposed dementia, I was living a life that was more fulfilling and purposeful than I'd experienced since Robert's death. The house was truly mine again, filled with the sounds of grandchildren's laughter and friends stopping by for coffee and conversation. My social life had expanded through my volunteer work and support group activities. I developed friendships with other elderly people who'd overcome various challenges, and we're living independently and purposefully. We organize monthly dinners, book club meetings, and educational seminars about protecting ourselves from scams and manipulation. I'd also begun dating again, something I never thought I'd do after Robert's death. Harold was a widower I'd met through my volunteer work, a retired teacher who'd also experienced family conflicts over money and independence. Our relationship was based on mutual respect, shared interests, and the understanding that comes from having lived through similar challenges. "You're an inspiration," Harold told me after I shared my story with him. "Not just because you caught your daughter stealing from you, but because you turned the experience into something positive. You're helping other people and building a new life for yourself." The house that Sarah wanted to sell remained my home, but I transformed it into a place that better served my current needs and interests. I converted Robert's old office into a craft room where I could pursue the quilting and painting hobbies I'd never had time for when I was working and raising children. The basement became a storage area for donated items I collected for various charitable organizations. The guest room that Sarah had designated for her own use when she visited was redesigned as a comfortable space for Emma and Michael to stay overnight whenever they wanted. It included a desk area where they could do homework and bookshelves filled with young adult novels and reference materials that might interest them. My garden, which Sarah had suggested was too much work for someone my age, became more elaborate and beautiful than ever. I hired a landscape designer to help me create sections that would be easier to maintain as I aged, but I continued to do most of the planting and daily care myself. The physical activity kept me strong and flexible, and the creative aspects of garden design gave me a sense of accomplishment and beauty. Sometimes people ask me if I regret taking such decisive action against my own daughter, if I wish I'd tried to handle the situation more quietly within the family. But I've come to understand that what Sarah did to me wasn't a family matter. It was a crime that deserved criminal consequences. And more importantly, by holding her accountable, I may have prevented her from victimizing other elderly people who might not have had the resources or support to fight back. The phone still rings occasionally, Sarah trying to contact me through various means, sometimes directly and sometimes through mutual acquaintances, claiming she wants to apologize and rebuild our relationship. She's written letters expressing regret and asking for forgiveness, promising that she's learned from her mistakes and would never do anything like this again. But I've learned that some apologies are too little and too late, and some relationships, once poisoned by deliberate betrayal, can't be salvaged. She didn't make a mistake or fall into temptation. She planned and executed a complex fraud over many months, lying to my face daily while working to destroy my independence and steal my assets. My focus now is on the relationships that bring joy and meaning to my life, and on using my experience to help others who might be facing similar challenges. Every month, I speak to groups of elderly people about recognizing and preventing financial abuse. I've testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger protections for elderly people and better training for professionals who work with seniors. The presentations I give always include practical advice. Trust your instincts if something feels wrong, document everything, don't be afraid to seek help from professionals, and remember that age doesn't make you less deserving of respect and autonomy. I emphasize that elderly people are not burdens to be managed. We're individuals with the same rights to dignity and self-determination as anyone else. The support group I helped establish has grown to include over 30 members, and we've expanded our activities to include educational workshops, social events, and advocacy efforts. We work with local law enforcement to train officers about recognizing elder abuse, and we provide resources for elderly people who suspect they're being victimized, but don't know how to get help. Every morning when I wake up in my own bed, in my own house, with my finances secure and my independence intact, I remember that victory over those who would exploit our vulnerabilities is possible. It requires courage, strategic thinking, and a willingness to face difficult truths about people we love. But it's worth fighting for, because our dignity and autonomy in our later years are too precious to sacrifice for anyone's comfort or convenience. The woman who thought I was too senile to handle money learned that I was quite capable of handling her mortgage cancellation, and everything else that came with the consequences of her choices. And that's a lesson I hope she remembers for the rest of her life, not just for her own sake, but for the sake of any other elderly person she might encounter who deserves to be treated with respect rather than seen as a target for exploitation. As I write this, sitting in the kitchen where Sarah once spread those assisted living brochures across my table like she was planning my funeral, I feel a deep sense of peace and accomplishment. The money she wanted to spend on her mortgage and European vacation is still mine, managed by professionals who respect my intelligence and autonomy. The house she wanted to sell and liquidate is still my home, and it will remain so for as long as I choose. Most importantly, the grandchildren she tried to distance from me by portraying me as confused and declining are now closer to me than ever, having learned important lessons about integrity, respect for elders, and the courage to stand up for what's right. They've seen that their grandmother is not a burden to be managed or a resource to be exploited, but a person deserving of love, respect, and the freedom to live her life on her own terms. The security cameras are still in place, not because I expect to be victimized again, but because they remind me every day of my own strength and resourcefulness. The woman who installed those cameras and gathered evidence for months, while pretending to be confused and helpless, is someone I'm proud to be. She's someone who understands that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones most willing to exploit your vulnerabilities for their own gain. But she's also someone who knows that with careful planning, professional support, and the courage to face difficult truths, it's possible to protect yourself and even turn the tables on those who underestimate your capabilities. Age may bring physical limitations and new challenges, but it also brings wisdom, experience, and the understanding that respect and dignity are not privileges to be granted by younger people. They're rights that belong to every person regardless of age. The story of how my daughter tried to steal my independence and my assets is ultimately not a story about betrayal and exploitation, though those elements are certainly present. It's a story about the power of refusing to be a victim, about the importance of fighting for your own dignity and autonomy, and about the satisfaction that comes from proving that wisdom and experience are forces to be reckoned with. And every time someone asks me for advice about dealing with family members who don't respect their autonomy, every time I help another elderly person recognize the signs of financial abuse, every time I see Emma and Michael treating older people with respect and consideration, I'm reminded that Sarah's betrayal led to something larger and more meaningful than she ever intended. It led to my own empowerment, and to my ability to help others find their own strength and voice. That's a legacy I can be proud of, and it's a reminder that even the most devastating betrayals can be transformed into opportunities for growth, service, and positive change. The woman who thought I was too senile to handle money ultimately taught me that I was capable of handling much more than either of us had imagined.